Good afternoon. I'm Coach Vicki. I am a women's transitional life coach, helping women to break free from toxic relationships that they know are over and they feel stuck in. They know they're over and it's time to leave. And I help them to break free of those relationships and to rebuild a life that they truly love. So we're here this afternoon. As our Q&A session, and the question was asked, how do I know when it's time to stay or go? When is it time to throw in the towel? So I have 4 questions that I would like you to think about, or 4 things to ask yourself in the process of evaluating when it's time to stay or go. No one else can tell you that it's time. You have to decide that for yourself. So the guidelines I'm going to give you today are great ways for you to think through whether it is time for you to go. And I want to point out that if you're asking yourself this question, it means there are most likely a lot of things going wrong in your relationship that you are questioning whether they can actually be resolved or not. And it's causing you to ask the question, is it time to go? So the first thing that I would encourage you to consider is your partner equally and fully engaged and committed to making this a healthy relationship? I'm sure that you can come up with a very spur of the moment answer to whether that is your relationship or is not. So some things that help you know that: does your partner's actions equal words? In abusive, manipulative relationships, quite often a partner will say one thing, but they will never follow through and do the actions. And actions have to be consistent with words for a long period of time. So not 20 minutes or 2 days or even 3 weeks. It has to be more like 6 months, a year, where the majority of that person's actions are equaling their words and they're really honestly working towards being consistent in both things. So if they say they're going to work on the marriage and go to counseling and do some things, then they need to do that. And if they're not doing it, then they're not pulling the weight of the relationship. So if you in any way feel like that relationship is unequal, that you're pulling a greater weight than the other person, or the other person is not allowing you, they're isolating you or not allowing you to have a say in certain things, then that is some extremely large red flags that could be telling you it's time to leave that relationship. And the key question is that other person willing to work on that, or are they not? If they're denying there's a problem, if they accuse you that you're the problem, then they're not being realistic and they're not trying to find a healthy answer to the problem. In relationships where there is abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, any type of abuse is a legitimate reason for you to walk away from a relationship, because no human being deserves to be treated in a manipulative, put down, critical, or abusive fashion. So if the person in your life is treating you that way and they're denying it, they're not taking any action to correct that behavior, then that would be a huge red flag, in my opinion, to say it's time to leave. Another turning point in making that decision is the fear of staying greater than the fear of leaving. So when we start thinking about leaving a relationship, there's a lot of fears that pop up, the what ifs and the fears, and they can seem very large and they can keep us from seeing how we can move forward. But if you've reached a point where you just say, I'm not willing to put myself through this anymore, and I'm willing to face those fears and figure out the what ifs, then it's time to make that decision and move forward. Even if there's fears and what ifs that you don't know the answer to, when you start to legitimately seek and find the answers to those things, the answers will come. For me, I knew at my turning point, I knew I was no longer willing to be miserable for the next 5 to 15 years the way that I had been miserable the last 15 years. I was married for 17 years, and really the last 5 of that, none of it was great, but the last 5 of it was extremely miserable for me. And I was bound and determined I was not going to live that way going forward. So that was a decision, a turning point for me, when I knew that it was worth now finding the answers to those questions to move forward, that life had to be better on the other side than it was here. So if the fear of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving, you know you are at a space where you're ready to make that decision. The third step is really key, and it really has to be in place, or you're working on it being in place for you to be able to make that decision to walk away. And that is having your self-confidence and self-esteem at a place where you understand clearly that you do not deserve to be treated in an abusive manner. And let's even back it off from there. Even if there's not things going on in your relationship that we could define as abusive, but you've grown in just 2 totally different opposite directions and you don't see a way to get back on that same page, it's okay to have the self-confidence to say this relationship is no longer working for me. It's no longer where I see my future, and I'm okay with that. And I can now go through the process of disconnecting from it to create a better life. I like to use the example of the frog in the boiling pot of water, because when you're experiencing abuse, if you would pull a healthy person off the street and drop them into that abusive situation, they would kick and flail and scream and do anything they could to get out of that as quickly as they could, because they would immediately be able to recognize that that's not a healthy situation for them to be in. However, if we've been raised in situations where we experienced some unhealthy things growing up, or we've just gradually been in a relationship that over time developed some of these unhealthy characteristics, then we don't recognize those as quickly. So the frog in the boiling pot is, if the frog is dropped into boiling water, he tries to hop out right away. But if you put him in the pot of water and slowly heat up the water, he'll boil to death, because he feels it's nice and cozy and warm, and he doesn't then know how to get out. So you may feel like that you've gradually just raised and adjusted your tolerance level to the abuse in your relationship. And so now increasing and investing in increasing your own self-confidence to know that you don't deserve that, where we can reduce the tolerance level now and down and say, I won't accept that anymore in my life. So 8 years ago, when I left my relationship and filed for divorce, I accepted a lot of things in my life that I don't at all accept today. And if somebody comes into my life and starts to treat me in a similar manner, I don't allow them to stay in my life. They're moved on, whether it's a friend or a dating relationship, or even family or whoever it might be. I have strong, firm boundaries on the expectations of how I expect to be treated in my life now. And then the fourth thing is, when you see your kids taking on the toxic behavior of your partner, or wherever they're seeing that toxic behavior, that's a huge red flag that it's time to get you and your kids out of that situation. Kids only know what they're taught. So if they grow up seeing you being treated poorly and someone else delivering that treatment, they think that's the way life is supposed to be. And unless they have a way to measure and see that that's not the way it's supposed to be anymore, then statistically they will grow up to repeat that behavior. So understanding this and understanding that you have the power to be the person to break that cycle for your kids, you have the power to be the person to create new generations of healthy people, treating each other healthy and establishing healthy relationships versus continuing the generations of abusive cycles. What I found to be true for myself is that those abusive patterns stemmed back through previous generations. So one generation is taught how to behave, and then they just carry that forward, and unless there's a shift in there, nobody does anything different. So you can be that shift for your kids by making the decision to leave and modeling new healthy behavior. The one thing I wanted to point out on the fear of staying becoming greater than the fear of leaving is when you're in a toxic environment, you're walking on eggshells and there's fear around you, you're having to monitor everything that you say or do and watch your back. That creates a physical reality as well that can cause us to be sick. It can cause us to not feel good and have a lot of ramifications. So it's really important to look at your health too as a signal that it's time to leave a relationship. So in summary, a couple of the ways that you can use to evaluate if it's time to stay or go is, one, is your partner pulling the weight that they're supposed to be? Are they being responsible and treating you as an equal, respectful partner? Or are they not? And if they're not, is there any willingness on their part to seek help to change? And if there's no willingness on their part, then it's probably time to make that decision to move on for your own sake. Because you can never create a healthy relationship where both people aren't totally in agreement on what that relationship is and working towards it. And being more fearful of staying and the misery that staying brings than of answering the questions and the fears and what ifs of moving forward, and then regaining your own self-confidence. I have a guide on how to regain your own self-confidence and self-esteem that if you have not used that guide, it goes over the 3 things that I personally use to help regain my own self-confidence and self-belief to that point of being able to leave. I'll post the link to that below. And then being able to not only be the role model for your kids, I mean, your kids is the most important, but you're a role model to everyone who's watching you, who knows or may know that you're in an abusive relationship. And when you take the steps and action to leave, you actually become a role model for other women and give them permission to seek freedom in their own life too. So I hope this has been helpful. If you're feeling stuck and you want some personal assistance on how to work through those things, I offer a free 30-minute assessment where we actually would dive into looking at what are 2 or 3 action steps that you can take to move forward to find clarity in your life. So you can schedule that as well. Hope this has been helpful. Please leave your feedback, comments below, and I will look forward to sharing with you again. Have a great afternoon.